Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we will learn about two very useful data types in Unreal Engine, the enumerator and the structure. These are user-defined types that can help us make our code more intuitive, keep things organized, and even allow us to pass a lot of data between blueprints in a convenient way. Let's get started. So now that we're back in Unreal, let's take a look at the first data type for the lesson, and that is the enumerator. An enumerator is a user-defined list of options, and it is user-defined because we created it as a separate asset in our content browser and we defined the items on our list. This data type can be useful because we can use it to keep track of many different things while in a game, such as the status of the player, animation states, etc. But it can also be very useful to further customize our blueprint classes. And if you recall from one of our previous lessons, here in the construction script, we're using two different variables to customize the light color and light intensity of our light. I would like to use an enumerator to further customize our blueprint. So let's go ahead and go into our map. And right here in the content browser, right click, go to Blueprints, and right there towards the bottom, you'll see Enumeration. Go ahead and click it, and let's name this Enum Color Options. Double click to open, and you see that we have a completely new interface for our enum. We can add a description here, and if we want to add an item to our list, we simply click on Add Enumerator. And you'll see that we have a display name and a description. So for this one, we'll do something very simple. Let's go ahead and add here specific color, and let's add another enumerator, and let's enter random color. Go ahead and save it. Let's go back to our blueprint. Now here under variables, we'll click on the plus sign and name our new variable. Color options can be named whatever you want. And here under the variable type, we'll go ahead and go back to single, click on the drop-down list and look for the variable we just created, which was enum color options. So go ahead and type that in the search bar, and you'll see that it appears here as its own separate data type. Go ahead and click it, and let's go ahead and compile. Finally, let's make this variable public by clicking on the eye icon. Let's go ahead and compile again. And now if we go back to our map and we select our blueprint, you'll see that we have a new option here called Color Options. And an enumerator appears as a drop-down list inside the editor. So if we click here, you'll see that we can see both options. And if we added a description, when you hover your mouse over, you'll see that description appear. So what is our goal here? What I wanted to do is, we already have a new color and intensity that is being applied on our construction script. I would like to add a separate option where if we select random color, we will then select a random color to apply to the light from an array. So let's go back to our blueprint. And now we'll simply drag and drop our color options to the construction script, select Get, and here we have a reference to our enum. One of the cool things about enums is that you can use switch statements, and we saw that in the previous lesson. So if you drag and search for switch, you'll see that immediately you have switch on enum underscore color options. Go ahead and click that. And you'll see that immediately we have an execution pin that goes there and two output pins based on the options on our enum. So predictably, if we select specific color, we would like to do the exact setup that we have here. So let's go ahead and move this here and put our enum in between here as such. But now if we select random color, we want to go ahead and change the color from one specific variable to a random item from an array. So go ahead and copy this node and connect it. But now instead of new light color, we want to change this to a random item. So a very easy way to do that is we're going to duplicate new light color. So right click, select duplicate, and let's name this color list. And now let's go to the variable type on the details panel and change this to array. Let's go ahead and compile. And now we have a list of colors. So let's go ahead and add 3 or 4 random colors that we would like our light to have. There you go. Let's go ahead and compile and save. And now we have an array with random colors. So let's grab our color list and drop it into our construction script. Select get. And from here, we'll drag and search for random and select random array item. We're gonna disconnect this by removing the node and simply connect our random node here. Lastly, we want to disconnect the set intensity node from here, and we'll move this to the front since we want this to be applicable no matter the options that we select. Let's go ahead and compile and save. And now you see that we have 2 different things that will happen based on the selection from our enum. So if we go back to our level and we again select our blueprint, right now the default is specific color. So as expected, the color that we have selected here will be applied to the light. But if we change our color options to random color, notice that now a random color from our color list is selected. And if we duplicate our blueprint by pressing Alt and drag, notice now that as I move the blueprint in the level, different colors are being applied. Because as I duplicate it with the random color selected, we are then picking a random color every single time. So I'm going to duplicate this a few more times. And you'll notice something curious. Every time we drag our blueprint, the color seems to change. And that is a behavior that is on by default for all the blueprints in Unreal. So if we go back to our blueprint here and click on Class Settings, you'll see that we have an option here called Run Construction Script on Drag. It's on by default. If you want to take that out, you can deselect it, and then this will only be run every time we compile. And if we go back to our blueprint here, the original one, let's switch from random color to specific color. We see that now we have the specific color from our variable. And every other blueprint has a random color from the list. And this is just one of many examples of how you can use an enumeration. Now let's go back to our blueprint and once again take a final look at our example. The next data type we want to look at is called a structure, or struct for short. A structure is a way of grouping related variables in one place, and those variables are called member variables. But unlike arrays, like we saw in the previous lesson, a structure can contain many different data types within it. So for example, you could have a boolean, a float, and even an enum inside a single struct. So what I like to do for this example is basically recreate all of the options that we see here in one single structure. For example, we have a color list, we have color options, we have a new light color. I would like to put all those values inside a single structure to keep things organized and more flexible. So the first thing we'll do is let's go ahead and rename color options here to something a little bit better like color method. So let's go ahead and rename it and let's compile. And now, just like an enumeration, we're going to create a struct inside our content browser. So let's go ahead and go to our map here, right click in our content browser, go to blueprints and select structure at the bottom. Let's name this struct light color. Now go ahead and double click to open it. And just like enumerations, we have a custom interface for our struct. So if we go back to our blueprint here, we know that we have an enum, which is going to give us the color method. We have a new light color, which is going to be used for specific color, and a list of colors, which is going to be used for the random colors. So let's first create our enum here and call it color method. So let's go back, and right here, click on add variable, and simply name the first one color method. And right here, the type, we'll click on the drop down and search for enum color options. Select it. The next one, if we go back, the next one will be a specific color of type linear color. So let's go back. Let's call this variable specific color, and the type, click and search for linear color. Go ahead and select it. And let's create one more variable. Click on add variable. And for this one, we'll call it color list. And instead of a single variable, we'll click here and we'll make this an array. And we'll click on save. Now, click on the tab that says default values. And we're going to again add some default values here. So for the specific color, we're going to add a purple. And for the color list, let's add a few random colors. And when you're done, simply click save. Now let's go back to our blueprint. And just like before, we're going to create a new variable. Click on the plus sign and call this color options. And here, instead of Boolean, we are going to set the type to struct light color. Go ahead and select it. We're going to make this public by clicking on the eye icon, and let's compile. And now if we go back to our map, with any of our blueprints selected, you see that now we have a color options, and if we expand this, we have all of the same options that we had above, but instead of having them as separate variables, we have them all organized in a nice collapsible category, as you can see here. Again, very useful for keeping all of our information and variables in one place. Let's go back and let's drag our new structure to the construction script and select get. And here, with the structure selected, you can see that the default values are exactly what we would expect. But if we drag from the pin, we have very different options. So go ahead and select break struct for now. And you'll see that we have all of the same options broken into separate pins. The exact same options that we have here are now represented with individual pins on this break struct node. And all we need to do now is simply replace our variables with the pins that we have from our struct. So we can replace color method with our pin here, new light color with specific color, and color list with color list here. We can compile, save, and if we go back, you'll see that we have the exact same options, but now everything is running from our struct. So now by default, all of our blueprint copies here are using specific color and have this purple. So let's go ahead and delete all of the copies except one. And now let's go ahead and just select the first one. And you can see here we have specific color. If we change this to random, now you see that a random color is being selected every time. So if you can duplicate this, you can see the exact same behavior as we saw before, except that now everything is being driven from our single structure. So if we go back to our blueprint, we can now simply delete all of the older variables because we no longer need them. And let's go ahead and compile and save. And if we go back, you can see that all of our information is now contained in one single structure called color options. Another interesting thing about structures is that you can have a structure within a structure. So if we go back to our blueprint here, we can see that we have all of our color options as part of our single struct. But what if we wanted to have an even higher level structure that includes, for example, the intensity and maybe some other properties? So if we click on our point light here, let's go ahead and find one more property that we want to include. We already have intensity. How about we do cast shadows? That'll be an interesting one here. It's a Boolean. So let's go back to our map and let's again right click, go to blueprints. Let's create another structure and let's call this struct light property. Let's go ahead and open it. And just like before, let's go ahead and add both of those properties. If we go back to our actor, cast shadows is a Boolean, so let's add that. Let's go back again. The next one is intensity, which is a float. Let's add it. And finally, let us go ahead and add our light options, which is a struct called light color. So you can see here. So let's go back here and add a new variable. And let's call it light options, or actually let's call it color options. And we're going to have the data type struct light color. Go ahead and select it. And let's go ahead and save. And if we go to the default values tab, you can see that now we have a cast shadows Boolean, a light intensity, which by default is 0. We can change that to 5000. And if we expand the color options, we have all of the same options that we've had in our other struct. So you can see that we're nesting a struct within a struct to create a much more complex structure with all of our options in one place. So let's go ahead and save. And let's add this to our blueprint. So go back to generic actor and let's add a new variable and call it light options. And in this case, yet again, we're going to use struct light properties. And you can see it right here, selected. And let's make this public. And for now, the other color options, let's go ahead and make this non-public. Now we're going to simply drag light options, select get, and just like before, we want to break the struct. So drag and select break struct. And you can see now that we have the two properties plus the color options that we had here before. So just like before, we can drag and select break struct. And now we are basically back to where we were before, except that now we have two additional options. So here's a cool trick. If you select Control and drag from one of the pins here, you can actually grab the connection and drop it somewhere else. So Control, click, Control, click. And now we've replaced all of those properties here. We can go ahead and remove this. But in addition, we have light intensity, which we can now replace with this variable. Like so. We can remove this. And finally, we have cast shadow. So let's make a little bit more space here for that. Copy point light, drag, and look for cast shadows. Set cast shadows. Go ahead and connect it. And let's move this back. And finally, let's connect cast shadows to new value. As you can see here, our example now drives all of our properties from a single struct. Let's organize this a little bit more. There you go. Let's go ahead and compile. And finally, let's remove color options since we're no longer using it. We can also remove new intensity since we're not using that either. And let's go ahead and compile. Now when we finally go back to our map and select either one of our generic actors, you can see that now we have light options, and when we expand, we have those properties like cast shadows and color options. So you can see that right now, if we zoom in, we are not casting any shadows, but if we click here, now we are. Notice the difference here as I toggle cast shadow. You can see the difference here. We can also change the light intensity right here. And finally, we can go back to our color options and change from specific color, in this case, to random color. We can do the same thing here by simply changing our settings, and again, random color. One last thing I want to show before we close the video is how to change a member variable within our code. So if we go back to our light property structure, we notice that the default value for cast shadows, for example, is false. Let's say that we wanted to change that within our code. We can go back to our blueprint here, and here, I'm going to zoom in here, we can drag from the reference, and instead of breaking our struct, which is what we used before, we're going to select set members in the struct. As you can see, we only have a struct reference and a struct out pin. But if we want to change a specific member variable with the node selected, we can go back to our details panel, and under the default categories, we can expose these properties as individual pins. So if we wanted to change cast shadows, we simply click on the checkbox, and as you can see here, we now have that node exposed. So let's go ahead and connect this. And now all we need to do is enable the checkbox. And now if we compile and go back to our blueprint, we'll see that the default value has now changed. If we click on this instance of our class, if you recall, before it was false and now it is true. So as you can see, structures can help us keep our code organized, and as you'll see later in the course, they make passing related data between blueprints more convenient. Let's do a quick recap. We learned about the enumerator and how it is a user-defined list of options we can create as an asset in Unreal Engine. We saw how it displays as a drop-down menu inside the editor and how we can use it with the switch statement to customize our blueprint classes. We also learned about structures and how they can contain a group of different variable types. We saw how we can embed structures within structures to create a more complex grouping of variables. Structures can help us keep our code organized and allow for a more intuitive grouping of parameters. If you want to practice what we learned, go back to our blueprint and add additional variables to our light option structure to further customize the class. And that's all for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.